personal responsibility. The defendant is trying to hide behind her company, when in fact she is the only owner and has the final say in all decisions. The evidence will show that the defendant had more than enough information to make better choices. Instead, she based her decisions on money. She knew, and she didn't care. My name is David Del Grosso, along with my co-counsel Joseph Kennedy and John Rowe. We are here on behalf of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And today, we will prove that the defendant, Ms. Tatum Zilius, is guilty of third-degree murder. Now, one must understand what third-degree murder is to determine if another is guilty of it. Third-degree murder is manslaughter with malice. Malice is described as a wickedness of disposition, a recklessness of consequences, and a mind regardless of social duty. In other words, the defendant must show a willful disregard for human life. The evidence will show that the defendant is guilty of these charges because she called for the lift of a 2,900-ton panel under extremely hazardous weather conditions, fully knowledgeable of the possible consequences. The defendant knew the risks, and she didn't care. Now, allow me to provide a little background of the incident. The defendant is the owner of Project Z, a company that has lately focused on the construction of small housing projects. The defendant decided to begin construction of a new apartment complex on a piece of land in Philadelphia known as Franklin's Trench. Project Z began construction in 2011. The defendant knew, however, that construction must be completed by October of 2012 or she would face financial devastation. The defendant hired Mr. Emerson Turnkin as her project site manager, a man who valued safety over speed. Mr. Turnkin will tell you today about the disagreements he had with the defendant regarding the importance of safety. These disagreements eventually led the defendant to virtually take over their responsibilities as project site manager. So from this point on, the project progressed with the defendant constantly cutting corners to hasten the construction process. Now let's fast forward to late August of 2012. The project was almost completed, but there was a hurricane set to pass over the city of Philadelphia in the coming weeks. Now, August 31st came, the day of the crash. And the day began with rainfall and winds whose speed were expected to increase as the day went on. The crane was set to lift 2 panels, each one 2,900 tons, onto the roof of the apartment complex. The crane operator, Micah Stratton, will tell you today that each panel's weight exceeded the lifting limit of the crane by more than 100 tons, an issue that the defendant was well aware of. On top of this, the defendant also knew that the impending storm would undo weeks of work on her uncovered building, therefore making the October deadline impossible to achieve. So she pushed for the lift to continue. The first lift came in the afternoon, and London Packard, an eyewitness of the lifts, will tell you today that while the lift was successful, it was anything but graceful. Even the crane operator will admit that he had great difficulty completing the lift. Then came time to decide if the second lift should take place. There was an inspector on site by the name of Grace Hopper from OCIS, or the Office of Construction and Inspection Safety. She advised the defendant to call off the lift because the rain was falling harder than ever and the winds had been increasing the entire day as projected. But with the burden of financial ruin bearing down on her, the defendant didn't care about these risks, and she called for the commencement of the second lift, the lift that would cause the collapse of the crane, the lift that would result in the deaths of Grace Hopper and Arthur Dent. Now, today, we will also call to the stand Mr. Quinn Baxter, the OCIS inspector who was assigned to the Project Z crane crash. He will explain in his expert opinion the reason for the crash, and will provide his knowledge of the safety records of the project while under the defendant's supervision. At the end, members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, you will find that the prosecution has proven the following 3 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. First, that Grace Hopper and Arthur Dent are dead. This has been stipulated to, and therefore neither side will contest it. Second, that the defendant is responsible for their deaths. The evidence will show that it was solely the defendant's decisions that led up to the collapse that killed these 2 people. And third, that the defendant killed these 2 people with malice. You will hear that by calling for the second lift, the defendant willfully put in jeopardy the lives of every person on that construction site, including those who died, Grace Hopper and Arthur Dent. You will find the defendant, Ms. Tatum Zilius, guilty of 2 counts of murder in the 3rd degree because she knew the risk of calling for that second lift, and she didn't care.
Weir, along with my co-counsel, Josh Hart and Christian Schaefer, are here today representing the rights of Tatum Zilius. Tatum Zilius is a businesswoman, and she understood every risk necessary to take to own her own private real estate company. Tatum Zilius, born out of poverty, is now today trying to build an eco-friendly community complex, something that she never had growing up. Now, she hired many people for her dream, and yet here she is today, standing trial for 3rd-degree murder for Artie Dent, an unstable squatter, and Grace Hopper, the OCIS safety specialist. In a world of continuously expanding business, it is our duty to make sure the cost for every transaction, just like clockwork, every tiny piece must come together to create an item. My witness, Tatum Zilius, a true businesswoman, understood the necessity for teamwork and cooperation throughout business, and she relied on the trust and the capabilities of all of her employees. But that trust was broken the day Hurricane Isaac came. 2 lifts were scheduled to plan, the concave panelings on the eco-friendly site. Sadly, the crane lifting the panels, fight and fell, and as a result, 2 people died. On that day, it was decided that my witness was going to be the primary scapegoat for many people's actions, including the OCIS, Tatum's business, and the Stratton Lift Services all decided to continue with the lift. But here my witness sits, Tatum Zilius. I'm here today to tell you the truth, and Tatum Zilius had the power to stop this lift, as did many today. The prosecution is going to try and tell you, and this very court, today that my witness, beyond an unreasonable doubt, had malice and has caused the death of Artie and Grace. I'm here to inform you today that there are multiple variables and people who are responsible for the death of Artie and Grace, some of whom are with us today in this very courtroom. Today to testify for my witness is Mike Stratton, who is a mechanical engineering expert and operated the crane Fight and Fill before the fall, and Reese Denter, a freelance journalist who is doing an undercover investigation on the trench site. And of course, Tatum Zilius herself, who was the owner and dreamer of Project Z for a better future. My witness's testimonies will prove to you today that my witness did not have malice and that there are multiple people that could have prevented this terrible tragedy. Other witnesses today will prove to you the uncontrollable and unavoidable circumstances that led up to the fall of Phil. I am here with my counsel to defend the rights of my witness, who is completely and utterly not responsible for the death of Artie and Grace. But it is your choice. One can either be deceived by the benefits of having one man being blamed for the actions of many, or we can accept reality and realize that every man must pay for their own actions. Thank you.
Accident that occurred.
Now, before we get into all that, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I received a degree from Penn State in management construction. I have 30 years of experience, and all this years of experience came from working on our first job sites.
So, while you were the site supervisor for Franklin's Trench, what were your responsibilities?
I had to do sweeps and inspections for the site. I had to make sure everything and everyone was following the necessary protocol, and I also set schedules for when people came in and out.
So, how long were you site supervisor of the site?
I was site supervisor for the duration of the project, up and including the day of the accident.
And how long did you act as site supervisor?
Until January 10th, and that was when Tatum Zilius came by to check the site. He started cutting check balances, adding overtimes and shifts, and something that I was not approved of. And by that point, everybody really knew who really was in charge. Even my own foreman went to Tatum before they came to me.
So, while you were acting as site supervisor, how did the site perform in any inspections that it underwent?
When I was site supervisor, when Quinn Baxter came, he was very impressed. There was only one minor violation, which we fixed.
And when Tatum Zilius was acting as site supervisor, how did the inspections go then?
When Tatum Zilius came, when Tatum Zilius was there, when Quinn Baxter went to inspect, he put many inspections and violations for the site.
Now, when Tatum Zilius asked you to be the site manager, what were your thoughts?
I was stunned about him asking me for Franklin Trench due to my reputation on following the regulations and not cutting corners. He often says fast means good, fast means progress.
Objection, Your Honor. You're set.
Your Honor, this is the admission of a party opponent.
Would overrule it.
So, what can you tell us about the day of the lift, August 31st?
I arrived early to make sure everything was going to go smoothly. I went to check at the crane and everything looked fine, even though I'm not an expert. And when Tatum came, he insisted that we start.
Objection, Your Honor. Extrapolation.
What is the response?
Your Honor, he testified that he was not an expert in crane, it was something that he just observed.
Anything else you want to add?
Mayor, he should not have said that because it goes beyond his knowledge.
Okay. I'm going to, at this point, I'm going to overrule the objection, but let's make sure that we're staying to what's within his knowledge.
So, how did the first lift go?
The first lift almost ended in a disaster. The crane operator, Micah, he almost moved the roofing panel into an apartment building because of the heavy gust, but we still got the roofing panel on.
And did anyone try to stop the second lift?
There was one squatter that, no.
Okay. And what happened during the second lift?
During the second lift, it ended up in a disaster. Half an hour in, there was someone found a squatter there mulling around, and Micah ran out waving the green flag to start. When the green flag was woven, the heavy gust caught the roofing panel and brought the whole crane down.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any cross-examination?
Yes, sir. Mr. Churchill, you have stated that you want to be a property developer, correct?
Yeah.
And that this being a site supervisor isn't how things were supposed to be.
No.
You want something more.
Yes.
And you also say that you don't get things done the fastest.
No.
And you take your time with the inspections. But before the lift, you conducted a quick sweep of the site, correct?
I did.
And you followed a minimum that the code requires.
Yes.
And you have never supervised a large-scale site like this before,
No.
have you?
That's fine.
You are also responsible for everything on the site, correct?
Yes.
Including safety.
Yes.
You also met Micah, the crane operator, before the lift.
Yes, I did.
And you were too aware that he was familiar with Hardy Field.
Yes.
You say that regardless of the weather, time, or temperature, he knew how to get the most out of Hardy Field.
Yes.
Before the lift, there was a meeting with the squatters, right?
Yes, there was.
You were present at this meeting?
I was.
And the squatters made demands regarding this site.
Yes.
And after those demands, you lost your temper with Will and yelled at one.
Yes.
And by your own admission in the statement, you started a feud with the squatters.
I did.
And then when things started to go bad, you blamed the squatters for those issues. At some point during your time as head supervisor, you lost interest in your job.
I did.
And you even stopped caring about things on the site.
Yes.
On some occasions, you even missed work.
I did.
And even when you were at the site, you were mindlessly signing paperwork and sorting through junk mail.
Yes.
And when there were issues, you told Micah to proceed with the plan with the lift,
Yes, I did.
even though you knew it was a mistake.
Yes.
And as a site supervisor on this project, you have many responsibilities that range from budget to safety.
Yes.
And you had the power to intervene if there was a problem,
Yes, I did.
or if something at the site was not compliant with the code. In fact, it was your responsibility, you said.
Yes.
And wouldn't you say that maintaining your safety on the site is your most important responsibility?
Yes, it was.
And you knew that if you talked to Quinn Baxter, you could stop the lift, correct?
Yes.
And you chose not to say anything because you thought that if you stopped the lift, you would be fired.
Yes, I did.
So even though you had concerns about the site, it was your job to monitor the safety, and you had the ability to stop the lift. You let the lift proceed.
I did.
No more questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Why you're here today?
I witnessed the crash on August 31st, and I also live at the site.
And how long have you lived at the site?
I've lived at the site for 25 years.
So were you there when construction by Project Z began?
Yes, I was there.
And about how much on average time a day would you spend on the site?
I spent every minute of every day there.
Every day of every week?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how close were you to the construction that was going on?
We lived on the site. We did get kicked off a few times, but we always managed to find our way back.
So you were very, very close?
Yes.
Okay. And when Project Z began construction, did you ever try to stop it?
Yes, we planned I wanted to do something to stop it, but most of the people that lived with me left and moved on.
So did you ever fight for it?
I then tried to plan a sit-in, but that never occurred.
Okay, Mr. Packard, I would like to move on to what you observed at the work site. Did you ever see any arguments there?
Yes, the defendant would always yell at the site supervisor.
Objection, Your Honor. You're safe.
Commissioner Party Opponent.
You said who yelled?
The defendant would yell at the site supervisor.
The objection is overruled.
And what would the defendant yell about?
I do think it was about the lateness and
Objection, Your Honor. You're safe.
Commissioner Party Opponent.
It's overruled.
Would you like me to restate the question?
yes, please.
What would the defendant yell about?
I do think it was about the behind the lateness and how the project was always behind schedule.
Okay, now about the safety on the work site, what did you observe?
I observed a lot of injuries that did occur. People would always hurt themselves in any way. There was second shift was even worse.
So there was more than one shift?
Yes.
There were two shifts?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what was the second shift like?
The state supervisor was gone, and Mrs. Zilius was rolling the whole thing, and there was one time that
Objection, Your Honor. Extrapolation.
It's in the statement. It's the defendant, it has been stated that the defendant was running the site after Mr. Turnkin left. She was the boss of the site, and once Mr. Turnkin left, she was left in position.
I'll let you cross-examine when the time comes, but I'm gonna overrule it for right now.
Would you like me to restate the question? Now, what happened during this second shift?
the defendant ruled over the work site when the site supervisor was gone. There was one case where a worker was on a ladder, the ladder slipped, and they were carried out in a stretcher unmoving, but yet the defendant ordered another worker into that same spot to finish the job.
Okay, now, did the defendant ever do anything about this increasingly dangerous site?
No.
No? Okay. Now, Mr. Packard, I'd like to fast forward to the final week of the accident. Did you ever go through the trash on the site?
Yes, I did.
And did you ever find anything?
I did find one thing. It had the city's logo on it, and I think it was about the crane.
Objection, Your Honor. Extrapolation.
The defendant has read the letter, and he is more than not qualified. He is more than able to draw his own conclusion from the letter. The letter that will be exhibited will be put into evidence as in my next right now.
You're gonna be putting that in?
Yeah, right now.
Okay. You'll have an opportunity to cross-examine the letter and any statements that he's making and impeach it if you find that appropriate. So overruled.
Okay, at this point, I would like to enter Exhibit 10 into evidence. Its authenticity has been stipulated to by this court, and the opposing counsel is being provided with a copy. Okay? Now, Mr. Packard, this is the letter that you found in the trash, correct?
Yes.
And can you read the last paragraph starting with please submit?
Please submit this information within 14 calendar days of this request. A failure to respond to this letter could be deemed a bias for denial for your request. A final determination of your request will be made within 30 days of your revised submission.
Okay, thank you. And, real quick, what is the date on that letter?
August 24th,
And what was the date of the crash?
August 31st.
So now, excuse me, my math is a little bit rusty, but is that 7 days?
Yes.
Okay, and that says 14 days, correct? Okay, thank you. All right, now let's move on to the day of the accident. Mr. Turnkin testified here just a moment ago that there were red flags and green flags on the site, determining whether to start the lift or to stop it. Now you saw these flags used on the site, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when the red one was raised, everything would stop,
Yes.
and when the green one was raised, everything would keep going.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you witnessed the lifts, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the weather like on the day of the crash?
During the crash, there was a lot of heavy rain and heavy winds.
So, what was the first lift like?
The first lift, everything, the crane was shaking and making screeching sounds. It's very loud.
Okay, and was it successful?
Yes, it was successful.
Okay, now how about the second lift? What happened then?
The second lift, the weather had worsened and it was even worse and the crane then collapsed.
Okay, now was the lift any shakier than the first?
Yes, a lot worse.
Okay, now during this lift, did it ever stop?
Yes.
So during the second lift, it stopped. Okay, and it was stopped because of the raising of the green flag.
The red flag, yes.
Or the red flag, excuse me. Who raised this flag?
It was the government lady.
It was the government lady. Okay, now did she have both flags at the time?
No.
No, she did not. Okay, so she raised the red flag.
Yes.
Now, who had the green flag?
The defendant did.
Defendant did. And now, when the government lady raised the red flag, what did the defendant do?
The defendant ran out with the green flag and shoved it in her hands.
She shoved it right in her hands. Okay, and then what did the government lady do?
She then raised the green flag.
And the lift continued.
Yes.
And then it was at this point that the lift collapsed.
Yes.
No further questions, John.
Councilman Lee?
Mr. Packard, you describe yourself as better than the other squatters,
Yes.
and over time, the squatters built up out of the church because they knew that they had to.
Yes.
And so it's just you and Artie, and Artie is described as one of the strangest residents of the church,
Yes.
and you knew that Artie would do anything to stop Phillips, right?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation. The witness has no idea of knowing Artie's peace of mind or state of mind.
Any response to that?
He states it. If I may approach the witness.
You missed it.
Please. Why say what you say?
Although neither I nor Turkin knew it, Artie was in earshot the whole time. He knew the land around the trench better than anyone, and he had found some back way into the site. Before I could respond, he charged, bellowing curses and swinging some kind of construction shovel.
Objection, Your Honor, this statement is not evidence, therefore you cannot read from it.
This is a official statement by.
It should be submitted into evidence before the witness reads from it.
Well, I think the question was for him to read, I don't know if he specified whether he should read it to himself or aloud, but the fact is he did read it aloud. So I'm gonna overrule the objection, but let's continue with the record, okay?
Artie made a crime behind this.
Yes.
And this fact that witness Artie vandalized and caused delays on the site.
Yes, I did.
You also observed him moving tools around. I then noticed that the work was couldn't find the tools.
Yes.
And each day they were delayed because they couldn't find the tools on the other day.
Yes.
So this directly caused delays in the project.
Yes.
And in fact, by your own admission, you said construction on the site was slow to a crawl.
Yes.
You also witnessed, before the lift, you witnessed Artie steal a wrench.
Yes, I did.
And you also saw someone near the crane in a trench coat
I wasn't quite sure, but I do believe it was already.
And you have never worked on this site officially, have you?
No.
And you were living on the site.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No more questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
I was the Office of Construction and Inspection Safety Inspector assigned to the Fight and Fill crane collapse.
And can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course, from 1998 up until recently, I worked at the Philadelphia Regional Office of the Director of Construction at US OCIS. During the events following the August 31st, 2012 crane collapse, I was the inspector assigned to the site. Prior to working at OCIS, I worked at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Bureau of Occupational and Industrial Safety for 7 years.
Basically, what does your job consist of?
Well, mostly I inspected work sites to check for code violations and to make sure that the workers are not in danger. Also, occasionally, after a major accident or injury, I will inspect the site to find the causation. I've worked on the safety side of construction for my whole adult life.
Can you elaborate on your background, educational and professional?
Yes. In 1985, I graduated from Carnegie Mellon with my bachelor's degree in civil engineering. And in 1996, I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with my master's degree in industrial engineering. In 2011, I received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Safety Council. For the past 18 years, I've been a member of the American Society of Safety Engineers, and I served as that organization's vice president in 2002. For the past 8 years, I've acted as a consultant in the Association of Crane and Rigging Professionals.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to offer Mr. Baxter as an expert in the field of construction safety. Have you ever testified in court before?
Yes, I've testified in court 10 times with DOIS.
And were you ever called to be an expert?
Yes, 8 of those times I was accepted as an expert.
Okay. When did you first meet the defendant?
I first met Tatum Zilius when I inspected one of her sites when I was with DOIS.
And what did you find when you inspected the site?
It was one of the worst sites I've ever seen in all my years of working in the construction safety field. I found over 12 citation-worthy offenses.
Did you issue citations or you did offenses?
Yes, however, Zilius only paid half of them. After that, I tried to check in on her work sites from time to time out of concern for the safety of the workers. However, she filed a harassment complaint against me.
And when was the next time you came into contact with Tatum Zilius?
In June of 2012, I did a spot inspection of Franklin Trench, which is one of her sites.
And what did you find in this inspection?
It was a very chaotic place. There was scaffolding on uneven ground, electrical wires were hanging loose. It was dangerous for all the workers and anyone else on the site.
What did you do after that?
Well, after that, I talked with Emerson Turkin, I was the site supervisor at the time. In my personal experience with Mr. Turkin, he's had a pristine safety record. As I had a stern conversation with Mr. Turkin, Zilius watched from above in her office. Then Turkin snapped at me and told me to sue him. After that, I just issued the citations, and they were paid by Tatum Zilius.
Were there any further incidents that summer?
Well, after the crane crash, I learned of an incident in which the crane operator was taking amphetamines and nearly caused serious damage to a neighboring building.
Your Honor.
Thank you.
I think it's in his state.
Okay, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Your Honor.
Okay, well now let's talk about the day the crane collapsed. Where were you?
I was in my office when I got paged over the loudspeaker to go to Franklin's Trench. On my way there, I noticed a text from Grace Hopper, who was the field inspector at Franklin's Trench, pleading me to call her urgently. This is all unusual. Never happened before.
What did you find when you got to the site?
When I got there, it was a cloud of dust. There were police and ambulances everywhere. After the crane finished collapsing, I found that improper pillings were used to secure it.
In your expert opinion, what were the likely causes of this crane
Now, there are a multitude of things that could have caused the crane collapse. For one, the weight of the panels was over the maximum engineering load of the crane. Also, the panels were curve-shaped like a sail, so it could have caught the wind easily and posed a more problem. In addition, metal fatigue could have played a role in the collapse of the crane. Fight and Fill was nearly a 20-year-old crane and had been used continuously throughout the project.
Is there any way to avoid dangerous metal fatigue?
One must check the crane periodically and use proper maintenance.
And did Zilius order any inspections of the crane according to your records?
according to my records, there were no morning inspections of the crane in the 6 weeks preceding the crane collapse, and the nightly inspections were few, and they were not thorough at all.
What precautions should Tatum Zilius have taken when he spotted that squatter in the work site?
We should have offered a full safety sweep of the construction site, however, that was not conducted.
And in your expert opinion, is there any reason to believe that a civilian could cause meaningful damage to the crane?
No, there's no reason to believe that a well-trained civilian could cause meaningful damage to the crane. Besides, the forces such as the weight of the panels and the wind would be more than enough to cause the crane to collapse.
Any further questions?
Okay. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Baxter, is it true that Tatum Zilius called your BOS inspector or supervisor, to complain about your work on one of his sites?
Yes, that's true.
And it's also true that he accused you of harassment and filed a complaint to this time to the governor's office.
That's true.
So it's safe to say that you didn't agree professionally.
No, I didn't.
Is it true that the first time you visited Project Z, you were actually very impressed with the safety precautions?
That is true.
Though the next time you visited, you were less impressed.
Yes.
And it's true you said that this visit made it apparent that Emerson Hermiton had lost control.
Yes,
And you observed him acting wildly?
that's true.
Wasn't he shouting at workers and engaged in a running debate with a street person? But you didn't see any red flags.
No.
After seeing the violations, you filed citations, correct?
Yes.
And Tatum paid them promptly?
Yes.
When specifically?
I'm not sure.
Witness.
Objection, Your Honor. The statement is not in evidence.
I think, go ahead and respond.
I'm going to ask the witness to read silent windows up just to remind.
Okay, and just make sure he identifies what that is, what that document is
Yes.
before you can do that.
Can you identify this document?
Your Honor, the witness cannot read it unless it's objected.
I'm going to allow him to read, it's his statement, he's going to read silently. I think this is a refreshing his recollection, am I correct? Yes.
Can you identify this document?
Yes, request the record.
Would you please read lines 1664? So, do you remember when he came specifically?
The next day.
Interesting. So in regards to Grace Hopper, you said you trained her and you trusted her completely.
Yes.
So when on the day of the class, you couldn't see why she hadn't called you earlier though.
Yes.
You also said that Project Z had no daily inspections for 6 weeks before the class.
That's true.
As safety inspector, wasn't that Grace's responsibility?
Yes.
Did you also say that you should have done it full, or they should have done it full week when they found the squad on the day of the class?
Yes.
Wasn't that Grace's responsibility to order that?
Yes.
But they did. And on the day of the class, you said that Hopper contacted you only 10 minutes before you put the sign.
That is true.
You let her handle the situation, correct? Because you trusted her,
Yes.
though you were her superior.
Yes.
So the turn came lost control, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Hopper did not stop the lift.
That's true.
And you said Zilius did not make a single decision that caused a red flag.
No, she did not.
Can you read your record?
Yes, Your Honor. Who would have been the one to order the inspections of the crane?
Tatum Zilius.
Tatum Zilius. Okay. So, and when did he order any inspections?
Not according to my records. In the 6 weeks preceding the crane collapse.
That's all.
Any recross?
And,
This marked be for identification for defense, Exhibit 5. And do you guys have a copy of this?
I actually believe we do not.
You're right.
Thank you.
Do you recognize this document, which is marked as Defense Exhibit 5?
I do.
Please. Your Honor, I offer this document for admission into evidence as Defense Exhibit 5.
I don't know what it is. I
Uh,
say you recognize it, but I didn't say what it was.
Can you please tell Your Honor what this document is?
Yes, this document is to the technological and engineering tolerances of the crane fighter bill.
Are there any objections to its admission?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, it's admitted.
Can you please tell us what on this documentation for Bill's capabilities tells us about the wind capacity, the weight capacity, and the maximum load that he can take?
Right. For the weight capacity, its recommended load is 2,750 tons, but that is set at 85% of the failure rate, and that would put it around 3,300 tons, which is way more than what we were lifting. Also, the wind speed, the maximum recommended threshold, is 30 miles per hour, but that is also set at 85% of the failure rate, which was also within the wind speeds. Also, I would like to point out in here that on the accident history of the crane, it says there's none. So there's been no major accidents with Phil.
Your Honor, may I just have permission to please give a copy to the jury?
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
No further questions.
My name is Louise Stentner, and I'm a freelance investigator.
Are you familiar with Tatum Zilius?
Yes. I reviewed a tip from trusted source from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Occupational and Industrial Safety that Tatum Zilius had one of the worst safety records of any developer in the area. I decided to go undercover.
So, what did you notice?
Tools were everywhere. I slipped, I fell, I even broke my ankle.
And did you investigate his new venture on Franklin Trenches?
Yes. I decided that I should really go undercover, and I knew that it would be journalistic gold.
And what, if anything, did you notice about this your investigation?
Well, people were actually living in the trenches. Squatters are the perfect sources, so I decided to base my article on Artie Dent, a squatter living in the trenches, because the safety issues were too minimal to report that.
Your Honor, I ask if this identification as Defense Exhibit 8, and can you please tell the judge what this is?
This is my article that I
Okay. Do you have a copy? No. I'll give you one.
Hang on for just a second, ma'am.
Here you are.
This is the article that I published.
And can you please read the last paragraph for the court?
We used to be a country where the government respected its people, where property owners could breathe easy knowing that they were safe in their bed from the tyrants at their door. But it is ignoring veterans like Artie Dent who now openly talk about trying to take down a crane that is placing a lid on conflict to his community. Can you blame him? Would you do any less to save your home?
Thank you, Your Honor. May I please give a file to the jury?
The same.
Yes.
Any objection to it being published to the jury? I don't think it's in evidence at this point.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you file that? Your Honor, I offer this document, Exhibit 8, for your admission into evidence as Defense Exhibit 8.
Any objection? Defense Exhibit 8 being admitted.
And that,
It's admitted and you may publish it to the jury.
thank you. Thank you. Okay, so why did you write this?
He was constantly muttering to himself, and I knew that he would be an ideal topic for the perfect story.
And did Artie Dent create any mischief on the Trenchburg site?
It seemed like it was his personal initiative to create mischief and vandalize. He even used a wire cutter.
Objection, speculation.
It's her lay opinion of my witness, of the dead person.
Okay, well, I think the objection is to speculation. Do you have a specific response to as to whether this witness is actually speculating?
Yes. Her Rule 801, Section 2, Paragraph E, states that she was familiar with the witness You were familiar with Artie Dent, correct?
Yes.
And you knew him for an extended amount of time. Yes. And you knew his abilities and his normal routines.
Yes, he was my top of my story. I was really focused on him more than anything else.
So, again, was he known for creating mischief?
Yes, he found a wire cutter to cut the fence. He had no problem destroying public property.
Okay. And, Your Honor, I ask that this be marked for identification as Defense Exhibit 9. And do you, does the good prison counsel also have a copy of this, or?
Yes.
You do? Great. And, Your Honor, I offer this document for admission into evidence as Defense Exhibit 9. And this is the dying declaration of Artie Dent.
All right. Any objections to the admission?
No, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
Ms. Reese-Denton, can you please read the 5th and 8th paragraph of the court?
Yes. The power of the people so downtrodden that there is nowhere to go but up. The wrench in the works will allow me to raise against the alien machine. And then the next bullet, the 8th one, is the answer is simple. A trench coat martyr, blood that will forever stain the stained prophet, a spot that can never be washed out, a mark on what will always be known to the trenchers of Franklin.
Thank you. May I have colors copy to the jury?
You may.
Thank you. And did you see Artie Dent after that?
August 29th, I was informed that Artie Dent was going to throw himself off the building next door, or he was going to follow through with his previous plan of lighting himself on fire.
And when did you last see Artie?
August 31st, 2011. He was standing near the fence, wearing a dirty trench coat, and it looked like he was praying. I don't think he stole anything.
Do you think that he was in control of his emotions?
No.
And could Artie have been linked to the crane fall?
Speculation.
Hang on for a second, there's an objection. What is the objection?
Speculation.
Okay, and I'm not sure, go back a second, the question was,
Do you think that he was in control of his emotions?
and what is your response to the objection, which is to speculation?
My response is that my witness extensively knew this person and knew the normal routines of the state of mind of the dead man, Arthur Dent.
Well, I think the question was, could you tell if he was in control?
Do you think that he was in control?
All right, I'm going to overrule the objection.
And could Artie have been linked to the crane falling?
He was constantly traveling between reality and fantasy, and I don't know what he's truly capable of.
Thank you.
All right, go right ahead.
Ms. Denton, you spoke to Artie Dent on August 29th, correct?
Yes.
Did he ever show you a written plan?
He showed me his declaration, dying declaration. And I was informed about his plan of either lighting himself on fire, and he did exactly tell me that he was going to throw himself off the building if he was going to do it either.
But after he died, you discovered his manifesto then, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time I'm going to confer to Exhibit 9. It's already in evidence. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Can you read from the document the last paragraph, please?
I'm pretty sure I already read this in my direct, but I will read it again. The answer is simple. A trench coat martyr, blood that will forever stain the stained prophet. Project.
Objection. Asked and answered.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
A spot that can never be washed out. A mark on what will always be known to the trenchers of Franklin.
Does that mention sabotage in any way?
No, it doesn't, but we can assume that this man would do anything to save the trench.
But he did not directly say that he would sabotage the crane in any way.
He never exactly said that, no. To say that.
Ms. Denton, you testified that you came to know of Ms. Zilius from reviewing documents from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Occupational and Industrial Safety, correct?
Yes, I was very focused on him. I was like obsessed with getting a story.
And to get this information, you bribed someone, didn't you?
Yes, to get the truth.
And you learned from these documents that Tatum Zilius had one of the worst safety records in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yes, that's why I was so obsessed.
And once you learned about this, you went to investigate it from scratch, correct?
Yes.
And you set up microphones and cameras, correct?
Yes, and then I found out that their safety issues were too minimal to report about. That's why I changed my topic.
You eavesdropped on the conversations that went on that site, correct?
Yes.
And in one of these conversations you eavesdropped on, you overheard the defendant say to Emerson Turpin going on and on about how they could pay for anything but time and how time is the only thing that matters. Is this correct?
Yes, but at this time I wasn't focused on it. I was taking my topic where it's already dead. I wasn't dropped around the idea of the trenches or the project itself.
But you heard Tatum Zilius say,
Yes.
going on and on about how they could pay for anything but time and how time is the only thing that matters. Correct?
Correct.
Now let's move on to the day of the accident. You saw Artie Denny in trench coat the day before the accident, correct? But you didn't see him do anything to the work site, right?
No, it seemed like he was praying, but I didn't see him do specifically
You
anything.
didn't injure anyone?
No.
Or moving any tools around?
Well, I'm not truly sure what he's capable of, but nothing that I saw.
Okay. Any further questions?
Any redirect?
Yes, no. Mr. Spencer, do you feel any responsible for the demise of Artie Denny?
I feel like I do have responsibility. I could have said something to make, well, we can make the assumption that he was responsible for some of his death, and I could take some of that responsibility because I did an article about him. I was close to him. I could have said something more to protect him from his life.
So, what you're saying is that my witness, Tatum Zilius, does not have all the blame because Artie had some of it and you feel that you shared some of it as well, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any recross?
There you go.
Can you please say your name for the board?
My name is Tatum Zilius.
And where are you from?
Well, I was born in a gutter to a father that I never met and a mother who was homeless. And throughout my entire childhood, we really depended on the public housing and public assistance of the city of Philadelphia. It wasn't an easy way of growing up, but we made it work.
And where did you attend college?
I went to Temple University, but left before completing my undergraduate education.
Why did you complete your education?
Well, while I was at school, I had saved up enough money to buy my own house. So I bought the house and I made some improvements, and then I was able to turn over the house for a profit. And once I had done this a few more times, I realized that I could make a business out of it. So I started my own business and had even hired my first few employees by 1990.
How did your business fare?
Business was going great. By 2004, we were making more homes than any company in the area. We were converting depressed communities into thriving suburban areas, which has always been my dream as a child of public housing. And the business was doing so well that we were bought out in 2006.
Who did you sell it to?
We sold the company to Short & Coors and entered into a non-compete clause until 2009.
What did you do during this time?
I went back to Temple to get my bachelor's and MBA.
And after receiving your MBA, what did you do?
I took some time off until I started Project Z on January 1st, 2010.
Can you please describe Project Z?
Project Z is a public housing endeavor created to benefit the less fortunate, which, like I said, has always been my dream as I used to be one of the people who depended on public housing myself.
How long did you spend developing Project Z?
My team and I spent 6 months of searching until we found Frank Ridge Trench to be the perfect location for Project Z. We were able to work out a deal with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and we secured the location.
Did you have enough money to fund the project yourself?
Unfortunately, in these tough economic times, we did not, but many organizations saw the good that we were doing in Project Z, and we were able to cover about 40% of the cost.
And what did you do to get the area approved for the?
By the end of 2010, we had our plans in place, the land rental was complete, and we had secured the permits. I also hired Emerson Turpin to be the site supervisor.
Who is Emerson Turpin?
Emerson Turpin was the exact person that I was looking for to fill the supervisor position, or so I had thought at the time, because he had a
Who else did you hire?
I hired a Stratton Lift Services. I read their promotional material and decided that we needed the biggest crane they had, which was the Viking Toe.
So when did Project Z break ground?
Summer 2011.
And how were things at the site moving?
Well, initially they were moving very, very slowly. 6 months into construction, the foundation hadn't even been fully laid, and what had been laid was vandalized.
How was that handled?
Well, OCIS began to take over the site more and more, not Mr. Turkin, who even though it was his position to supervise the site, and time was not being used efficiently and minimal, and not was being made.
Did you take any action after what you saw?
I did. I spent more and more time in the project manager's office where I reviewed all the paperwork personally. I fenced the squatters out, and even while I was there, I took notice of how hard my employees were working. So, despite the fact that it went against new rules, I gave them a little bit of extra money because they truly deserved it, and it was the least that I could do as a thank you and a tribute to their hard work.
How did you deal with Mr. Turkin?
I just gave him 2 simple instructions. One was to follow the code, and more importantly, to protect our workers.
So did work pick up after that?
Things were still falling behind, but we had adopted a second shift, so the site became active 16 hours a day. We were starting to make more progress, but then we received some bad news.
What was that news?
The new solar panels that had been created for the building were finished, but they each weighed in at 2,900 tons, which was more than the maximum capacity of the crane. But Mr. Stratton of the Stratton Lift Services had explained to me that even though they were more than the maximum capacity, the crane had lifted this weight before and more with success. And we knew that the city was in support of Project Z, so we decided that it would be okay to proceed forward.
Did you take any more control over the site following that?
The site became active 24 hours a day. I was practically there from dawn till dusk, and I bought an apartment so I could always be at the site.
So where did things go from there?
Well, in August, the roof for the building had finally been finished, and I was so happy and I was so proud because it really felt like my dream to have a modern public housing building was finally in view. I've waited for this my entire life, but there was just one thing that was damping our spirits.
Can you please tell us what that one thing was?
Well, there was a hurricane brewing in the Gulf of Mexico, and even the smallest of hurricanes could set us back hundreds of thousands of dollars, and as well as in time.
How did you deal with this oncoming hurricane?
We held a team meeting, myself, Mr. Stratton, Mr. Turkin, and Ms. Grace Hopper from OCAS, because we were all very concerned about the heavy winds and the rain. But Mr. Stratton had assured us all that as long as the lifts had been conducted before the wind started picking up, that there would be no problem at all. And bearing in mind that we had the city's support, we decided that it would be fine to go ahead with the lift.
Did anything happen after that?
On August 31st, Mr. Stratton, conducted the first lift, and everything was fine.
What happened later in that day?
There was a shift change, so we were getting ready for the second shift, as well as Mr. Stratton was preparing for the second lift, and the second lift was interrupted to do another sweep of the site. Nothing was found in the sweep, so Ms. Hopper held up the green flag, which indicated that it was fine to proceed with the lift. She went down to the site to watch the lift, and I went back to my office and I watched from there.
How did the second lift go?
Well, I mean, at first everything was fine, but then the winds, like the gusts, they started picking up, and everything was just happening so fast. The crane topped out, and then the roof started sliding, and in what felt like seconds later, I just watched horrified as the roof fell down, and it tragically fell on Ms. Hopper and a man who was on the site, but we did not find this man when we were doing this week.
If you could do this over again, what would you change?
Well, I don't really think I would change anything. A horrible accident occurred. I think about it every day, and I never wanted anyone to get hurt ever. But we did what was expected of us, and we followed instructions. And myself, along with Mr. Turkin, Mr. Stratton, and Ms. Hopper from OCIS, we all really worked collaboratively as a team to make sure that Project Z came to life, and I suppose that's really all I can ask for.
Thank you. No more questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
incentives built into your contract for Franklin's Trench, correct?
That's correct.
And these incentives were payments that you would receive if you completed the project by a certain time.
That's correct.
And that time was August 31st, or was August of 2012.
Well, to finish the entire project was October 2012, but the schedule was on August 31st, 2012. Yeah.
Okay. So, but if you completed the project in October of 2012, then you would not face severe losses.
That's correct.
Okay. Now let's talk about your visits to the site. You visited the site in January of 2012, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you were disappointed with what you found there because it was far behind schedule.
That's correct.
And this was because they were adhering to the code very strictly.
Not necessarily. Things were just not being done on time.
We have heard testimony today earlier from Mr. Turnpin saying that he was behind schedule because he was following following the codes specifically.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you said in your in the direct examination that you were happy with him at first, Mr. Turnpin.
Yes, at first I was.
And what changed your mind?
I just felt like he wasn't being efficient with his time. And
He testified that he was just following the code specifically.
well, yes, I did want him to follow the code. That was important, and as well as protecting the workers. But this is a business, and I really don't like the nature of this business. But it's unfortunate that things have to get done on time, and there will be, there will be severe backlash if not. That doesn't mean that I would want anything bad to come from that. It's just there's an expectation, and you have to fulfill that.
Mrs. Elias, have you ever heard the saying, better safe than sorry?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
It goes to the, withdrawn. Now, Grace Hopper was the site inspector assigned by OCIS, correct?
That's correct.
And you felt that Ms. Hopper was unfit for this job.
I didn't feel that she was unfit.
But you felt that she was running the site like a construction kindergarten?
I did say that, yes.
And so, in response to this, you decided to cut the safety sweeps and the briefings.
I did.
And when these were cut, there was an increase in code violations and in injuries of your workers, wasn't there?
There was, yes.
So did you ever re-lengthen the briefs and the safety sweeps in response to this?
They were kept at 1 minute and everything was kept at 10.
Okay. Now let's talk about the panels and lifts. The roof of the building was composed of two solar panels, correct?
That's correct. I wanted to have an energy neutral building so that the future residents wouldn't have a problem affording to pay the utility bills, which is often a problem.
Okay. And each panel was about a city block long,
That's correct.
and each panel weighed about 2,900 tons.
That's correct.
Okay. Now you said you were aware that the 2,900 tons exceeded the crane's lifting limit.
Objection, Your Honor. That was asked and answered. Correct.
I said that you were aware. I was just restating it for the jury. So you were aware that the 2,900 tons was above the crane's lifting limit.
I was aware of that, but I was also aware that the crane had lifted that weight and more before, so I knew that there wasn't.
Okay. But because of this, you had to ask the city's permission to do the lift,
That's
didn't you?
correct.
Okay. And did you ever get permission from the city?
Not in writing, but we did have the city's full support in the project.
Okay. So you decided to go along with the lift without permission.
Myself, Mr. Stratton, Mr. Turpin, and Ms. Hopper all collectively decided this.
Okay, but you had the final decision.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in August of 2012, you found out there was a hurricane headed your way,
We were aware of this, yes.
and if the rain got in your building, it would set you back so that you wouldn't be able to reach your October deadline.
That's true, yes.
Okay, and you would lose a massive sum of money, including those incentives that we mentioned in your contract earlier.
Yes,
Okay, and you would be financially ruined.
that's correct.
Okay, now let's talk about the meeting you had before the crash on August 30th. You held the meeting with Mr. Turnkin, Ms. Hopper, and Ms. Micah Stratton.
Yes, that's correct.
And the meeting was about whether or not to proceed with the list the next day.
That's correct.
And there were concerns voiced about the winds and the weather. Is that correct?
Yes, we were all very concerned about that.
Okay, at this point, I would like to enter Exhibit 7 into evidence. Do you have a copy?
Yes, we need one.
Okay, there are 3 parts to this, so I'll be using them separately. I'll be referring to part 1 right now. They're all weather reports of different times of the day.
Okay, what time the witness identified?
Okay. Now, this is a weather update that you received at 12 a.m., correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and please read silently as I read aloud. This says rain, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the winds are 5 to 15 miles per hour?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I would like to publish this to the jury.
Any objection?
Oh, God.
Actually, that's not evidence.
Oh, I would like to move Exhibit 7 to evidence.
7A is the first part.
7A, yes.
Okay, it's
Okay.
admitted.
And I was referring to here and here. So you were aware of these winds, but you decided to go ahead with the lift anyway.
Yes, myself, Ms. Hopper, Mr. Stratton, and Mr. Turpin all came to the agreement that we would go ahead with the lift.
Okay, but the first hour of the lift was a little bit scary. The first lift was a little bit scary, correct?
It was a little bit, but everything was fine. It went well.
And it's Grace Hopper even screamed.
That's correct.
Okay. So at 2 p.m., Grace brought you, after the first lift, she brought you a revised weather report. Is that
She
correct?
did.
At this point, I would like to move Exhibit 7B into evidence. Can you read what that says right there? Rain. It says rain and wind, and the wind speeds are 10 to 12 miles per hour. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And the time of that is 12:05.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's admitted and you may publish it.
Okay. I'll refer to the same spot as appeal. Now, during the second lift, the lift was stopped, correct?
Yeah,
Because Grace Hopper raised the flag.
that's correct.
Okay, raised the red flag, stop the lift.
Yes, basically.
Okay. Now, did you have the green flag at this time?
It was in my possession, yes.
Okay, and it's true that you shoved the flag right in her face so that she could continue with the lift.
I handed it to her after we conducted a sweep and nothing was found.
You gently handed it to her.
I handed her the flag.
Okay. And at this time, I would like to submit 7C into evidence. This says rain and wind, correct?
Yes,
And this is wind speeds 25 to 27 miles per hour, correct?
yes.
I would like to publish this to the jury, referring to the same area. Okay. Now, it is my understanding that you did not check that weather report, did you?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, if you saw it, would you have called for the lift to stop?
Objection, Your Honor, to proper conclusion.
It's a reasonable question. If she found out about it, would she have stopped it? It's in evidence.
I'm gonna allow it.
Okay. Would you have stopped the lift if you knew about it?
If I had known what would have resulted from the lift, then I would have absolutely stopped it because I never ever wanted anyone to, I never wanted a death to result from this. But had I not known that, at the time, I wouldn't have called her to stop.
You would not have called for it to stop.
No.
Because the
never.
weather was more important than the safety of the people on the site.
That's not what I said. If I had known that anyone was going to get hurt as a result of this weather, then I would have not called for it. But because I was unaware that such a tragedy would occur, then I.
But you didn't feel there was any risk by calling for this with such great winds? No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to approach the witness, which has been previously marked with evidence, is Exhibit 10. That's Class, please identify how much time you have to submit this code.
They submit this information within 14 calendar days of this request.
And can you please read the day of the time?
August 24th, 2012.
So you guys still had 7 days to submit this claim, correct?
That's correct, but I had put Mr. Turpin in charge of talking to the city. This was not my responsibility. I've never been seen that happen before.
Thank you. No more questions.
Any recross?
One question. Before you called for the lift, you did not have permission from the city.
That's correct.
No further questions.
Yeah, I think that's allowable, actually.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you've heard many facts. I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to these facts and put together your conclusion of whether Tatum Zilius is guilty of third-degree murder. The conclusions you formed based on these facts relied heavily on the burdens that we, as the prosecution, needed to prove to you today. The first burden that we needed to prove was that both Grace Hopper and Arthur Dent are dead. This needed no deliberation, as it was stipulated to before the trial began that they both passed away on August 31st, 2012. The second burden we needed to prove was that the defendant, Tatum Zilius, is responsible for their deaths. Through the testimonies of Emerson Turnkin and London Packard, you heard of the careless manner at which she ran the Franklin's Trench construction site. She made Micah Stratton continue with the crane lift in howling winds and pouring rains, even though others on the site knew the risk that was taking. The actions that she undertook on the site are responsible for these two deaths. The third burden that we needed to prove was that the defendant killed these two people with malice. Once again, malice is defined as a wickedness of disposition, recklessness for the consequences, and a mindless disregard of social duty. In short, malice is a mindless disregard for life. We have proven this to you beyond a reasonable doubt through the testimonies of every witness that took the stand today. Emerson Turnkin told you about the careless manner at which the Franklin's Trench construction site was managed, with tools being left around, all while the amount of injuries continued to rise and rise on the site. Quinn Baxter told you of the report that he performed before the crane accident and all of the citations that he issued against the site. Some of these citations were not even paid. He also told you of the report that he filed after the crane collapsed, and that told you that the damage that the crane had that caused the collapse could have been seen and taken care of before the lift took place, had the proper inspections been done. Both London Packard and Reese Stentner further explained to you the poor conditions on the site and the anarchy that took place under Zilius' control, further telling you about the left-around tools, the terrible manner in which things were being run, and all the injuries that took place on the site. Micah Stratton specifically told you that the weight of the roofing panels being lifted were above the maximum engineering lift limit of the crane Fight and Fill. He also told you that for a lift above this weight limit to take place, government permission must be given. Did this site receive that required government permission? No, they did not. And the defendant, Tatum Zilius, came to these lengths driven by her desire for a monetary bonus if a October deadline was reached. She knew that if she did not get the roofing panels on by the time that the hurricane-force winds and heavy rains of Hurricane Isaac swept through Philadelphia, the setback would be great enough to make her miss this October deadline. No delay could stop her, and the green flag she waved on August 31st put everyone's life on the site in danger. She waved this flag with malice. She waved this flag for a willful disregard of life. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you again on behalf of myself, David Del Grosso, and John Rowe. The facts you have heard today help us prove these three burdens. A, that Reese Stentner and that Grace Hopper and Artie Dent are both dead. B, that the defendant, Tatum Zilius, is responsible for these two deaths. And C, that the defendant killed these two people with malice. As you leave to go and come to your conclusions, I would like to ask you to remember two facts. One, that all inspections and faulty equipment aside, no government permission was given for this lift to take place. And the second fact is that everyone on the site realized the poor weather conditions that day and how they could negatively affect the quality of the lift. We have proved our three burdens to you today, and I ask that you rule in favor of the prosecution, because a woman whose motto is "I don't care if people get hurt, we can pay for that," should be held accountable for her actions.
Thank you. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. I think we have.
Gentlemen, I would like to thank you for carefully evaluating the information which we have given to you today. I would like to take this time to highlight for you the most important facts that we have learned. You heard from Micah Estratton, a renowned crane operator, who assured Tatum Zilius, based on his experience, that the crane could handle the lift that was scheduled for August 31st. You heard from Reese Stentner, an investigator who understood the instability of squatter Artie Dent, yet did not think to tell Tatum Zilius or anyone else of this instability. Another witness, London Packard, learned of this same instability, though he failed to understand how Artie could harm the site. Emerson Turnton, the site manager at Project Z, a man with an impeccable record for safety, who was completely inexperienced with larger sites. And under the high pressure of a larger site, he lost control and failed to do his job. Quinn Baxter, a talented OCIS inspector who saw this loss of control and also saw the inaction of her employee, Grace Hopper. Due to Hopper's inaction and her failure to maintain safety procedures at the site, Quinn Baxter left his duties unfulfilled. Finally, you heard from Ms. Zilius herself, a businesswoman and an experienced manager who unknowingly and unintentionally made the wrong decision in a moment of extreme uncertainty and difficult conditions. We are not here to determine who was at fault in this situation. We are here to determine whether this woman, Tatum Zilius, a woman who has dedicated her life to escaping poverty and helping those with a similar plight, is guilty of murder in the third degree. To be guilty of murder in the third degree, one must act with malice. One must act with cruelty, recklessness regardless of the consequences, a mind regardless of social duty, and one must consciously disregard an unjustified and extremely high risk to others. Ms. Zilius acted in a manner that she believed was appropriate and valid. Ms. Zilius and the others involved in this collapse work in a high-stress, chaotic environment where danger is not only inherent, but unavoidable. Ms. Zilius acted in a manner that was matching her firm belief that the lift was safe based on the circumstances. Though the prosecution might lead you to believe that Ms. Zilius would have known better based on her experience, Ms. Zilius had worked in this manner for her entire career and never once experienced or was part of an event such as this. Though, in hindsight, it cannot be denied that Ms. Zilius made the wrong decision. It is clear that under the circumstances, the unusual circumstances, the abnormally high risk could not have been anticipated. Imagine you were driving down a traffic-filled street. The chaos causes you to misjudge a turn, and unfortunately you find yourself in a collision, and someone else has died. As tragic as this is, were you partly to blame? Yes. But did you commit a murder? In the eyes of the law, certainly not. No one, including yourself, knew that your turn would result in the death of another. In the situation of Franklin's Trench, the actions of all those combined to allow for the deaths of Grace Hopper and Artie Dent. Ms. Zilius and the others no one person can cause a disaster such as this. Ms. Zilius made her decision based on the actions of others. The actions of others led Ms. Zilius to make a decision that at the time seemed proper, though it did not work out as she had expected. I stand before you now and I ask you to defend the innocence of Ms. Zilius, a woman who has worked tirelessly for the betterment of the lives of others, for the cities of Philadelphia, Detroit, and Memphis. Tatum dreamed of a better future. Tatum did not act with malice. She did not act regardless of the circumstances. Tatum listened to the advice of others and abided by laws. I ask you now, for the sake of Tatum Zilius and for the sake of each of us who take risks every day, unknowing the unpredictable future, to find on behalf of the defendant and find Tatum Zilius not guilty. Thank you.